Hi, everyone. In our last session, we talked about the 5 leadership qualities that work: humility, listen, communicate, EQ, and IQ. And we talked about specific things that we can be doing to remain true in this midst of a storm of epic proportions with uncertainty and unrest, constantly staring us down. Today, Warren is going to talk about resilience. He's heard hundreds of stories of leaders, spouses, parents, and dreamers who have lost it all, fought back, and found even greater success than before. That is the resilience of overcoming adversity. And he's going to share some of those stories today. We're going to engage you with 3 questions during this episode, and I'll be posting those during the episode. The first one is, what lessons have you learned from this most recent disaster? The second, what are you doing now to mitigate future disasters? And the third, what have you done or will you do now to build your resiliency? So I'm going to encourage you to think about those 3 questions when they're posted. Please share in the chat so that we can have that conversation together. And again, this is a big thank you to you for being part of this series, because we're all connected through Warren, his leadership, and our gift of togetherness. Incredible conversations and insights that help us and support us as we grow as leaders. And thank you for your contribution, your questions, your leadership, and for your togetherness in these uncertain times. And each week, I have the amazing opportunity to introduce Warren. Many of you have seen Warren speak and attended events, and you know how it goes, something like this. And here's Warren. For all of you that have not met or seen Warren before, Warren Rustand is former CEO of Providence Service Corporation. He served as member of the board of directors for over 50 public, private, and not-for-profit companies. Warren served as appointment secretary to President Ford, global chairman of WPO, co-founder and dean of faculty at the Entrepreneurs Organization's EO Leadership Academy. Countless awards, Sports Hall of Fame, White House Fellow, but the award Warren treasures the most is Father of the Year in his hometown of Tucson, Arizona. Just remember, this is a conversation, so please continue to post your questions and share where you're from. We'd love to know. This live stream will live on this Facebook page, Warren S. Rustand, as well as future episodes, so you can continue the conversation with Warren and, more importantly, with each other. Please share it. You can also find this series on YouTube, Warren S. Rustand page. And thank you for all being here. We are all in this together. Here's Warren.
Thank you very much. Glad to be with you this morning here in Tucson, Arizona, and good evening around the world. And I hope where you are, it's a good place and that you're in a good place. Today, we're talking about the leader within us, and we're trying to build the leader within us. All of us trying to improve, all of us trying to get better all the time. And so as we think about that, one of the critical pieces to understand in our leadership journey is resilience. What does resilience mean? How do we think about it? How do we use it to our advantage? So we'll talk a bit about that today, and I hope that that's helpful to you. And we'll pose some questions, as Winnie said, and we can have that as a discussion. Please enter in the chat box those kinds of things that you'd like to talk about. Or if you just have questions about the subject matter today or anything else, then let's talk about that as well. We'll try to answer as many questions as we can. So we hope to see you in the chat box with your comments and your thoughts. So what does resilience mean? What's an easy definition? Well, try this. It's the ability to bounce back from surprises, catastrophe, or disaster. So it's the bounce back ability. So many people, when surprises happen, when difficulties occur, we get trapped and paralyzed in the moment, in the current state. We can't believe what's happened to us. We're overwhelmed with emotion. It's difficult. It's hard. There's no question about it. The example, of course, before us today is the pandemic that's sweeping the world. Here in the United States, for example, cases have risen 84% in the last 30 days. Fortunately, the death rate has dropped about 19%. But those are scary numbers. Those are difficult circumstances. And in the United States, in most states within the United States today, is very challenging. But I was talking with my good friend Smita in India yesterday, and it's rising dramatically there as well. And as I talk to people around the world, there are many difficult places. And so this pandemic has caused us great damage financially, economically, in our families, in our communities. And while we're aware of that, it's interesting to observe and watch people who are trying to bounce back from a surprise or a disaster. A quick case in point, my wife had back surgery about 4 months ago. She's been in recovery. It's been slow, difficult process. And she's recovering at our mountain cabin, which is high in the mountains of Arizona. And there are some dirt roads up there, and it's difficult for her to walk on them. So I bought her a golf cart that she could drive around and be more mobile. And so she called me yesterday to say that, surprise, she'd had an accident, that she was driving over a soft spot, the wheels turned suddenly, and she was ejected from the golf cart. And she fell onto the road. She was bloody, she was battered, and she broke her arm, her right arm. And so as I was chuckling about this misfortune, and again, surprise, right? Catastrophe, disaster, right? How do we react? How are we resilient? Of course, I kidded her about her driving ability. And then of course, the most important thing was I asked her, how's the golf cart? Is it okay? And so as I see her, I'll drive up to the mountains later today to be with her. But this notion of it, another surprise. Life just tossed us one more hand grenade. And so we just have to bounce back from it. We have to react to it. And she's in a position where she now is dealing with two issues. One is her back surgery and a recovery from that. And then the second thing is now a broken arm. And yet she was cheerful and happy and positive because she's learned over many years how to bounce back and how to be strong and resilient. And so these are difficult and hard times. We don't want to minimize those. We want to understand that this tugs at us emotionally. It challenges us in ways that we can't imagine. When we have something like the pandemic hit us and then other things are added on to it, we feel as if forces are aligned against us in the world and only we are being challenged. But let me assure you, from the hundreds of people with whom I've spoken over the last 4 months, it's extraordinary how deeply people have been touched by this and how difficult their lives have become. So resilience requires our ability to react to surprises. Resilience is about how we react to negative circumstances that affect us and hurt us. So the first step as we think about resilience is prepare for surprises. They will always come. They will always be there. As I look back over my lifetime, I've been through about 13 dips in the economy, a couple of serious recessions. And we have to be able to react to that. We can't get so caught up in current state and so occupied with what's happened to us that we suddenly begin whining and crying and woe is me and all the self-pity stuff, because that damages our ability to bounce back. We have to immediately learn what we can, refocus, and think about the future. We have what's called an availability bias. The only available information we have about what's happened is the event itself. And so we look to that to try to learn something. But once it's happened, it's already past tense. It's already beyond us. It's happened. And it's really about our evaluation of our current state and our ability to look forward that makes a difference. And so this availability bias of looking back, preparing for the last disaster, we say things like, I'll never let that happen to me again. But the fact is that that exact disaster will never happen again, most likely. The exact same circumstances, same event, same consequences won't hit you in the same way. And so it's hardly likely that we'll have another pandemic. In fact, the last pandemic was in 1918, over 100 years ago. So as we think about, let's not use the availability bias. Let's not focus on what happened to us. Let's think about where we're going. What happens during this circumstance is that we learn lessons. And the question is, what lessons have you learned from this most recent disaster as you looked at the last 4 months? What have you surmised? What have you gained? What have you thought about? So put that in the chat box and let's talk about it. The notion is that we should have learned some important lessons about what has happened with the pandemic over the last 4 months. In fact, we think about it, the pandemic first became public in Wuhan, China in January. It's been over 6 months since we've been in it. It seems like forever, and it almost seems commonplace. But what happens to us in this situation is we become fragile. We become vulnerable. We feel the hurt. It's real pain, and it doesn't go away quickly. But our reaction to it is very important. No matter how deeply hurt we are, no matter how painful it is financially, economically, in our family, in our communities, we have the obligation as leaders and the leader within to find our strength, to find our reserve, to find our resilience, and to bounce back. We need to generalize and expand our knowledge based on what's happened and then apply it to our future decision-making and choices. If we do that, we will be able to manage surprises. And the surprise could be like Winnie Hart, building a business in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, New Orleans, Louisiana, everything going well. But the surprise was Hurricane Katrina, pouring over 200 billion gallons of water into New Orleans. Her home was destroyed, her business was destroyed. And she could have focused on, woe was me, again, the self-pity. But she immediately changed that to use her resilience to bounce back. She moved in with friends. Other friends gave her support for her business. She began the rebuilding process right away, even when there was water on the streets, even when there was water filling the homes. She began the rebuilding process. It hasn't stopped since, and she's rebuilt a great business. Now living in Houston, and we know about Houston and its flooding over the last couple of years. But she's been able to bounce back, right? And what are the ingredients that allow us to bounce back? The first is being positive. So simply looking at something that's difficult and challenging and find the good, find the positive, and accentuate the positive in our own thinking and in our own mind. It will strengthen us emotionally, intellectually, physically, spiritually. We need to be able to do that. And so stay away from the negative and focus on the positive. The second step is increasing our adaptability. What we do know from disasters, surprises, catastrophes, is the ability to be flexible, the ability to be adaptable is absolutely essential if we're going to succeed. If we're going to be the leader, and we're looking at the leader within us, then our ability to adapt is critical to our success. And our failure to do so also means we'll have a difficult time. And so we have to stop the pain by learning from the circumstance and begin to focus on the future to see what we can do there. We have to create backup systems. We have to think about what we can do to ensure that we can live through another cycle. And so the question is, what are you doing now to mitigate future disasters? How are you preparing yourself? Because one thing we're assured of, we will always have adversity. That's a given in life. If you think about where we've been over the last 30 years, it's been SARS and the bird flu and the swine flu, and it's been MERS, and it's been Y2K, and it's been the meltdown of 2008, 2009, and now we're in the middle of a pandemic. It's not as if these surprises stop. It's a continual process in living. And so can we mitigate some of those circumstances as we go forward? Can we, in fact, live through them better by being adaptable and flexible? So create backup systems, which increases our flexibility. It gives us optionality to mitigate that which is difficult or challenging. And we can then begin to capitalize on the opportunities that the crisis themselves present. And capitalizing on those opportunities is about future thinking. It's about using our best positive ideas and actions and emotional state to capture what might be possible going forward. Many thousands of businesses, thousands of people have pivoted during this period of time and taken on new directions, new activities, new challenges because of what the crisis has presented. Let me give you one example. Many years ago, probably 40 years ago, we got some very strong and sage advice. And that was that to prepare for future circumstances and situations, our worst case, what should we do? And this very wise man told us that we should have a year's supply of food on hand at all times. And that seemed strange when I first heard it. But over the years, it's been a blessing. So we did, in fact, took his advice and we prepared a year's supply of food that we have on hand at all times, even today, and we've had it for the last 40 years. A year's supply of food. And so we regularly use that year's supply and then just resupply that year's worth of food. So we always have a year's supply of food ahead of us. So our worst case scenario is that we could survive at least for a year with food. He also said, the second part of his advice, you should have a year's supply of cash on hand. Now that's harder. For a young entrepreneur trying to build businesses, having a large family, getting a year's supply of food was doggone tough. But we did it. And for many years, we've had a year's supply of cash on hand. And then the third part of his advice I thought was also interesting. He said, there are circumstances sometimes that are so difficult, so challenging, that you have to get out of your house right now. It could be a flood. It could be a fire. It could be an earthquake. It could be a tsunami. It could be any number of things. Why don't you put together a 72-hour emergency bag or kit? That if that happened, you can simply grab that, and every member of your family has one, and you can simply leave the house and you can survive for 72 hours, food, shelter, whatever you need. And I found, again, that advice to be challenging, but I also found it to help us, because our worst case circumstance in any given surprise is that we can survive for a year, we have cash for a year, and we have an emergency kit that we can run out the door with and protect our family for at least 72 hours. Those kinds of activities have created flexibility, have created adaptability, and optionality for our family in the event of difficult circumstances. So what have you done to prepare? What have you done to mitigate? What have you done to be ready for the next surprise, the next challenge, the next catastrophe? All of which are coming. We know that to be true. Andrew Zolli and Anne-Marie Healy wrote a book, and in it is a quote I like very much, if I might give this to you, about surprises, about what's happening. Surprises are by definition inevitable and unforeseeable, but seeking out their potential sources is the first step toward adapting the open, ready stance on which resilience response is built. So this notion of that we have to be open and ready, we have to be prepared. And this pandemic has shown us, as did the economic downturn in 2008, that we need to be better prepared than we were previously. The third step then is build our resilience. And how do we build our resilience? How can we do that? The first step is to be positive. It's like when my wife and I were informed, we wanted to have a large family when we first got married, and we were informed by doctors that it was biologically impossible for us to have children, that we would have never have children together. And through an interesting process, we ended up, after 4 years, having 7 children. And we're blessed to have them. But there was a time we never thought of it as negative. We always thought we would have children. We just had to find the route forward. We were prepared to adopt children if we couldn't have our own. But we knew we'd have children in a large family. And so we were always positive. So the first step in building our resilience is to be positive and have a positive attitude. The second is to have a more disciplined routine about everything we do in life, because discipline prepares us for surprises. Discipline is really helpful. Oftentimes, when crisis hits, we lose our discipline. We don't focus on the day-to-day activities that actually have given us our success. We stop working out. We don't eat right. We're not getting enough sleep. And pretty soon it wears us down, and it frays the edges of our emotions in ways that make us difficult to be with and difficult to solve problems. And so this notion of discipline has to continue with what we're doing. The third is that we need to have lessons learned, right? What are the lessons that we're learning from all of this? I see all of these things as teaching moments. The mystical forces in the universe are trying to teach us some things about ourselves, our families, our communities, and our preparation for life. And what are we learning, and how are we going to do them differently? And what will we do to make us more successful the next time that catastrophe, disaster, surprise hits us? And so that's the next one. And then beyond that, you have to be future focused. Stop looking at what's coming at us and start looking at where we're going. Take what we've learned, apply it to the future, get going. So what have you done, or will you do now to build your resiliency? What are the specific steps that you're going to take? Are you going to be more disciplined? Are you going to be more positive? Are you going to be more future focused? And are you going to build your close support system of loving friends and family who are around you at a time like this when disaster strikes, right? It's important to have that close support group that you trust, that you love, that you admire, that builds you up and give you strength. Family is essential during this period of time. Extended family, friends, close friends, who will help you as they helped Winnie Hart, as they helped my wife when she had her accident just 2 days ago. So these kinds of things become important. Now, there are 5 key characteristics of resilience that I'd like to just offer you real quickly. First, self-awareness. Be aware of who we are, what we are at our core, and what we can see and do in our environment. Secondly, understand this is about independence. It's about us. It's about me. It's about you finding your personal resilience. And how do you do that? It's a notion of independence. Next, take initiative. Don't sit around and wait for others to do things in crisis, surprise, or disasters. You take initiative. Go out and launch into something. Be active and proactive. Lastly, be creative. Think about things differently. It's often said you have to think outside the box. I don't buy that. I say you have to get outside the box. If you stay in the box and try to think outside the box, it's difficult. But if you step outside the box, a whole new world opens up to you. You can think more creatively. You can think about future activities, future things that you can do that you wouldn't have thought about if you remain in your small box. And lastly, I think you have to have a sense of humor. In the final analysis, we have to laugh at ourselves because we do dumb stuff and we don't make smart decisions. And all of us have failures. All of us are part of that. But we have the ability, because of the leader within us, to make good decisions, to make good choices, to make our future better than our current state or even our past state. And no matter how challenging and difficult and problematic it might seem at the moment, the future awaits us. It creates opportunities for us. We have to step into that. And when we do, we need to step into it with a sense of humor and understanding that all things are possible. Keisha Blair wrote a book about resilience, and there's a quote in there that I like very much that may be helpful to us today. Building your resilient muscles starts with the way we process negative events in our lives. Mental toughness is a prerequisite for personal growth and success. Adversity allows us to become better rounded, richer in experiences, and to strengthen our inner resources. In the end, resilience is about who we are inside. As leaders, we must have strong resilience. We must work at that resilience. And there are times when we have to rebuild our resilience. During this epidemic, there's been an unbelievable amount of damage that's been done in health, in science, and economics. The financial reverberations of this pandemic will extend for decades and generations. It's a rebuilding process. So positivity, optionality are all critically important to our success. Building our resilience is what we're about. The next time we talk, which is 2 weeks from today, we're going to talk about exponential impact. The notion of how can we have exponential impact, particularly in a time of personal crisis or difficulty, how we can extend ourselves and have an impact far beyond ourselves. That'll be on July 23rd at 9 a.m. Now we'd like to take your questions and respond to as many as we can. And thank you for responding to the 3 questions that we asked. We can see that we already have a lot of answers. So we appreciate that, and I'll turn the time back to Winnie. Winnie, I can't hear you.
All right, thank you. Can you hear me now?
I can.
Awesome. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to go back and read some of the answers to your 3 questions, because I think there's some really good feedback in there and they tie to some of the specific questions that people are asking. The first question was, what lessons have you learned from this most recent disaster? And Chuck Bender, what a great response. Thank you so much. He's talking about being prepared for things you can't see. How, Warren, do we prepare ourselves for things we can't see?
Yeah, there will always be things we can't see. We couldn't see the pandemic coming, or nobody could, right? It's not anybody's fault. It just happened, right? We couldn't see the financial meltdown that came in 2008. We couldn't see, SARS and the bird flu and all those kinds of things. And 100 years ago, people didn't see the Spanish flu coming. So what we do to prepare is prepare ourselves as leaders. What we want to do is strengthen our values, strengthen our core, right? It's being positive, it's being strong, it's being disciplined in ways that make us better, so that when that surprise comes, when that challenge and ultimate disaster hits us, we're better prepared to handle it than if we weren't. It's like my wife getting ejected from that golf cart. Yep, she was bleeding, she broke her arm, but she bounced up. Okay, this is temporary. I can fix this stuff. I'm not dead. Everything's okay, right? Life goes on. And by the time she talked to me, she was chipper and happy. And, it wasn't woe is me. It wasn't, oh my gosh, things happen to me, always happen to me. Once we adopt that negative attitude, we simply are not prepared for the surprise. But if we can be strong, if we can be the good leader within, to build off our strengths, our core values, emotionally, physically, intellectually, spiritually, those four big ones, if we can do that, then Chuck, we got a chance to survive. We got a chance to be better. We got a chance to do good things.
Yeah, one of his comments was having clear values around decision making makes them easier to make.
Absolutely.
So what about decision making? You mentioned that in the beginning, about making decisions.
Yeah, you look at us as leaders, we make decisions all the time as leaders of families, as leaders as businesses, and leaders in our community. And we're making choices and decisions. And we get about 40 million stimuli a day. And it's about voices and choices. We got lots of voices coming at us, and it's about the choices we make. Now, we've been given a gift of free agency, and that's the ability to make choices and make decisions. And so how we choose to make them and the ones we choose to make are really critical, because we have a wide range of choices. Leadership within us, the leader within us, will help guide us toward the best choices of the alternatives that are offered us. And often it's a decision between good, better, best. It's not a decision between good and bad. It's a choice between good, better, best. And making those subtle and nuanced choices are all about the leader within, because they're predicated on our core values. They're predicated on the strengths that we have. Those help us make our choices.
Yeah, and I guess if we make the wrong decision, we just make a new one.
Exactly.
Yeah. Rob Samuelson is talking about focus and about focusing on what's important. He says there's so much unproductive, angry denial commentary that just doesn't matter. Warren, how do we turn it off?
That's the key. Turn it off, right? Turn off your TVs, turn off your social media, turn away from the negative. Turn away from those who are going to find fault, who are pointing fingers, who are going to lay blame. It doesn't matter. When we're in the midst of a crisis, all that matters is that we have plans to get out of it, that we work our way through it. And we're living in a society and societies around the world today that are hypercritical, very serious finger pointing. It's always someone else's fault. It's never my fault, right? It's always somebody else's fault. And we need to accept responsibility and accountability for who we are, what we do, what our families do, what our businesses do. And we need to focus on the positive, and let's just not get into the negative. Let's turn off those voices that are continuously negative, that continuously put us in a negative space. There's no reason for us to listen to negativity. Let's just turn it off. Take a sabbatical from your technology from time to time. Maybe it's for an hour or a day or a week. We recently went several days where we just turned off our technology. And guess what? The world hadn't changed very much when we turned it back on. It's just that we didn't need to hear the negative stuff that's there. So stay away from it. Go to positive sources, read positive things, listen to positive things, control your environment, listen to good music, do good things, have fun with your family, take care of the positive stuff. And the negative is just an aside and won't be a bother to you. Thanks for the question, Rob. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and Jamie Draghi's talking about that very fact about, that we are leaders and we are around and we are surrounded by people that look to us And our ability and our capacity to handle these challenges and present a positive attitude is critical. How do we lead people that are not in the same place we are?
Yeah, the first thing is that we have to be the positive force for good. Leaders just have to do that, right? We have to see the bright side. We have to see the opportunity. We have to see, yes, crisis is here, but the springboard, the pivot point for that takes us to another place. So we have to be the voice of reason, the voice of calm, the voice of rational thinking, because there are many around us who aren't in the same place that we're in, don't have the same responsibilities we have as leaders, and will take the lesser route, will take the easier route, which is to be critical, to have self-doubt, to be paralyzed, as I said earlier, by fear, right? And to be in a situation where they can't cope. So the ability to cope with the disaster and then move from that disaster is really essential. And isn't really that what the human experience has always been? The human experience has always been about overcoming adversity. And the best leaders and the most successful people and the most successful communities and countries and so forth have been about overcoming those fears and overcoming the self-doubt and overcoming all the barriers that are placed in front of us. And I think that's, if we're true to our leader within, if we're building ourselves as leaders, that's where we have to position ourselves. Being the negative leader very rarely gets you anywhere. It just doesn't help anything. So be that voice of calm and rational thought, and be the one who's reasonable, and move forward and take people with you on the journey. Gain their trust and encourage them to come with you. Encourage them to be positive as well. And when you do that, I think you change the game for them.
Change the world.
Absolutely.
So I remember during Katrina, thank you for sharing that story. I remember specifically, really writing down scenarios like, what is the worst possible thing that could happen? And I literally, as far as my imagination would go, put those on paper. And once I saw those and kind of got comfortable with those, then I didn't worry about them anymore.
Right.
And I also talked to my team about them to say, hey, look, I know this sounds crazy, but these are some things that could happen. So the things that actually did happen were pretty minimal.
Mm-hmm. I think, we think about what's the worst case? Well, the worst case is I die or people I love die. And if that hasn't happened, then we're in a pretty good place. We can move forward. We can make things happen. We can do things differently. The great thing about being a human being is our ability to adapt, our ability to be flexible, our ability to move from where we are to some new place. And we know for eons of time that the species that survive and develop and evolve are those that are most adaptable, right? They can make the best out of any circumstance, and they adapt to new environments. And oftentimes that's what we have to do. You think about the tsunami that hit Aceh province a few years ago, just a wall of water coming at unbelievable speed and destroyed everything, killing thousands of people. And people had to pick up the pieces from that. And, it's just very, very difficult circumstances. And yet today, it remains a village. It remains a place. They've built new schools. They've built new stores. They've built new hotels. They've done a great thing because they adapted. They were flexible. And yes, they mourned for those who they lost, but they built and moved forward. And that's always been the human experience.
Just kept going. It's amazing. Disasters can be quite beautiful in a very awkward way. Your second question, what are you doing now to mitigate future disasters? There's a lot of conversations in the group about cash reserves and about on the business side, diversifying, but on the personal side, cash reserves. And the question is, how do you calculate a year of cash reserves?
Yeah, for me, it's total income, right? So whatever that total income is, I can adjust my expenses. I can work with my cost structure, right? But it's total income. And so I look at my total income annually over the last few years, and I decide what it is, what amount I need to have on hand, available, readily available. So I do that, and I do that on a regular basis. And so those cash reserves are always set aside. They're always available to us. And we have the use of those if we need them. A worst case scenario, right? That everything goes away. And all I have is a year's supply of food, a 72-hour kit, and the cash that I need to survive. And if I can do that, then I know that my family's good for a year. And in a year, the leader within is going to help me figure out the future, right? So if I can buy a year of time, I'm in good shape. But you can calculate that cash reserve however you like. You can set the standard and the criteria for that. For me, it's the highest total income that I can have, and then that's what I want available to me at any moment in time.
So you talk about the 72-hour kit, and Leda Ratanzi, hi Lena, is talking about preparing a war chest. What's in the 72-hour kit?
Well, there are really interesting things in the 72-hour kit. I mean, first you have to have shelter, right? You have to have a flashlight. You have to have basic foods, right? So you have dry foods, easily packed, lightweight, foods that you can translate into other things. You have some water, but water is very heavy. So you have a little bit of water because you may not be able to find clean water anywhere in the short term. Hopefully in the longer term you can, right? And so you build those in sets. You have to have something to start a fire with, for example, right? So you have to have either matches or a lighter or something like that. You, as I mentioned, the flashlight, lightweight jacket, all those kinds of things, right? The ability to keep the elements away from you, something to sleep in. You get these lightweight sleeping bags that are a few ounces now, right? That you can cover up that retain body heat. So all of those kinds of things that go into that. So it's shelter, food, the ability to start a fire, that you have a compass, right? Because your electronics may be shut down in a disaster like that. Even cell towers may be down, for example. We rely so much on our cell phones. So you have a compass, you have the basic elements of being outdoors for a period of time and being able to survive.
Yeah, just during Katrina, one of the things I never thought about were those two things. One, I could only get $500, 500 US dollars out of the ATM a day.
Yep.
Second, I didn't have cash. And then the second was the cell towers were down, so I had no way to communicate with my team. So having a way and a plan prepared in case you can't communicate with people was critical.
And one of those things, obviously, if the cell towers are down and maybe the bank's destroyed, your earthquake, think about an earthquake, ATM is not available to you. You want to have some cash, but you also probably want to have a satellite phone so that you aren't dependent upon on-earth structures to communicate. And so a satellite phone allows you that opportunity to communicate more broadly and to listen in on other emergency broadcasts and find out what's going on and where the resources are. Where do you go for help? Those kinds of things. The 72-hour kit is designed for a complete disaster. For example, the mountains that surround Tucson, Arizona have been on fire for the last month. Almost 200,000 acres burned. At one point, they came within a mile of the city itself. Well, what had happened in Paradise, California last year, where 1,800 homes were destroyed, the entire community flattened, every single resident had to evacuate. That 72-hour kit becomes critically important as you're moved into a high school gymnasium or you're taken to temporary shelter, whatever. You've got the essentials with you and can survive. And that's critically important. And it builds confidence for your family and it builds confidence in you, right? You talk about resilience. You know you can be resilient because you can survive. If you have a year supply of food, a year supply of cash, and a 72-hour kit, you know that you can do that.
That's fantastic. Would you be open to sharing some of those things that you've done to prepare those in the
Yes.
Facebook feed at some point?
Happy to, yes.
Thank you. We've got a couple of requests for that. So Mary Leonida, she asks, what can we tell young people who have just graduated from college about resilience during these times?
Well, I think for many young people, they're experiencing their first disaster, their first difficulty, their first challenge. We sometimes protect our children, protect our young people, and don't always give them life experience because we don't want them to be harmed or hurt in any way. But the reality of it is that all of us need to experience this kind of life. And I think it's important early in life to have this kind of experience because it prepares you for future events that are certainly going to happen and maybe even more devastating than the pandemic that we've been talking about. So I think it's a great life lesson. I think we ought to be talking to our children about it. We are, our children and grandchildren. We're spending time educating and having them understand what's going on, why it's going on, that it may happen in the future, how they can prepare for that future. So I think it's actually a bit of a blessing to have something early in your life, to have an appreciation for the really good things in life and have an appreciation for what can go on in the world and how you can interact with that.
Warren, you mentioned the word blessings. Chuck asks, what about faith how does faith play a part in resilience?
Yeah, I think all of us have to find our faith. I talk about the mystical forces in the universe a lot. I think every society on earth that I'm aware of, at least, has drawings, even going back to pictographs in caves, of a higher being, of a higher power, of some universal influence, right? And so we happen to be a family of faith, but faith is a very important part of that because it gives you confidence. It gives you a sense of continuum. It gives you an understanding of purpose, of life's purpose. And so I think that's a role that faith plays for lots and lots of people. And for those who don't have that, I think they're still understanding that there are forces in the world, for good and for bad, that do affect our lives. And trying to have an understanding of those and how they operate is really important. So I think all of us can utilize our particular spirituality, whether those are just our core values and our core beliefs. It's just dependent upon the leader within us, or there's a belief in a higher power of some kind. I think all of those things contribute to us becoming stronger leaders.
Yeah, and you talk about, the leader within us. There is an us, and I've noticed through this following through these amazing series that you've done and these conversations that you've had with the group, that we are a community of like-minded leaders that are looking to find that leader in us so that we can be the best possible leader in this crisis. Because the world depends on it.
I think we have much more capability than we give ourselves credit for. I think we have a huge, huge reservoir and reserve of power. And when we get really challenged, we reach into that reservoir of power and we use it as a resource to drive us forward. I think leaders especially have an obligation to be the shining light on the hill, to be a beacon for others who want to move forward but don't know the path. Martin Luther King once said, faith is taking the first step without being able to see the entire stairway. And sometimes leaders have to take the first step, not always knowing where other steps will take us, but taking the first step is the absolute commitment you have to make to resilience and to moving forward. And so I believe that we have the opportunity as leaders, we have this tremendous power within us. I think we only tap a small portion of our power, and we really find out who we are during crisis and times of trial. That's when we really are challenged. And so I think all of us have this great, strong, powerful leader within us. We just need to let that person shine, let that person out, and do it in a constructive and positive way. And when we do that, we then lead others to their best self as well. So the three things I want you to remember from today's discussion. First, prepare for surprises. They're always going to be there. Second, increase your adaptability and flexibility. And third, build your resilience. You do those three things, and the opportunities to be successful are inherently ours. Take care of yourself. Have a great day. The next episode, July 23rd at 9 a.m., we're going to talk about exponential impact.